Okay. Shabbat Shalom. All right, let me just uh, for now, if anybody wants to unmute, you can. Linda, you look like you're in the car. I think that should be a little more careful there. All right, let me just make sure. One second here. Been so long since I've done this. I'm trying to remember all the things. Here, let me just make sure. Philip,
Okay,
Linda.
it didn't allow us to unmute.
Okay, yeah, no, I think I like
Yeah.
switch that up. Just so everybody knows, so we are also streaming. So anybody who doesn't want your image most likely shouldn't show up. But if anybody is concerned about that, you can always turn the video off. Let me spotlight for me. I hope everybody's not too disappointed that we decided to go Zoom tonight, but it felt like the safer of the options for sure. Good. Quick question for anybody who's with us on the Zoom. Does anybody have candles close at hand that we might be able to use for candle lighting tonight? Bonnie Mahoney, you do?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And truth is, actually, anybody who would like to light candles tonight can, but as long as we have at least one. All right. So Kathy Weiss has, Bonnie, if you want to grab yours. I think we've got another minute or so. Um, for any of our people who are out here for the storm, are you all taken care of? Do you need anything? Linda, are you okay? Or are you, where are you? Let's see.
Yeah, we're driving from Lindenhurst.
From Lindenhurst. So you're in front of the storm, or I hope we're not in the storm.
We're in the storm.
You're in the storm.
I'm not
Reporting live.
driving, but we're in it though.
All right. Well, it's like saying to Tehillim on the bus. If you're connected to us davening, then hopefully you will be protected,
Yeah.
arrive safely. Right? That is what I hope. All right, Letskowskis, you guys okay?
We fine.
Okay.
Can you hear us?
Yes. That's now I can hear
Okay,
you.
we fine. Thank you.
Okay, good. Yofi. Okay. Yes. I'll show you what my original background was just for humor. This is the image, we're all imagining we are somewhere in the to all of our friends who may be watching from warmer places for sure. But we'll imagine that we are in the sanctuary, which is always a nice thing. But I hope everyone had a nice end of Hanukkah, a nice end of the week. And so I think we'll get started with our service here. So I'm going to just mute everybody. But Kathy, if you wouldn't mind, I'll leave you unmuted. And Kathy, if you would help us with lighting candles, let me just do that. And if anybody has their Siddur at home, we're on page 120. So Kathy, I don't know if you feel comfortable leading us with the blessing. You're
Sure.
welcome to.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahalak ner shel Hanukkah.
Well, close. Shabbat.
I mean, Shahad,
Yes.
I said in my head, don't say Hanukkah. And
You know what though? It's statistically, it's a guarantee that it will happen. I've had to
got
say
nervous.
it's the only reason why I only use that melody with Hanukkah is because otherwise, for sure, it would happen to me every time. Kathy, you did great. You came to our service. Okay, it's wonderful. Thank you for doing that. And again, Bonnie, if you're lighting at home, Kathy, I'm going to remove the spotlight and I'm going to put you back on mute for now. And let's just see here. Mute all. Should be all set for now. So like I said, if you're watching us at home, Marcia, if you want, you can always put stuff in the chat here. Okay. Marcia, what do you say?
Bonnie has something in the chat. She asked,
Okay.
muted.
All right. Well, I think we've lost. I can't see her, but Bonnie, if I didn't unmute you, I apologize. All right, but we're gonna get started with our service. We'll move to page 130, and if you have any other things, you definitely put it in the chat. I will see it. Okay. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena, ladonai. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena, ladonai. Naria, Naria, Letzori, Shenu Nekad Machana Betoda. Naria, Naria, Letzori, Shenu. Bizmirot Naria Lo. Lechu Nerahanena, Lechu Nerahanena, Lechu Nerahanena, Latonai. Lechu Nerahanena, Lechu Nerahanena. Lechu nerahanena ladonai. We're now on page 131, Shiru Ladonai. Shiru Ladonai, Shiru Shir Chadash, Shiru Ladonai, Kol Haaretz, Shiru Ladonai, Baruch Hu Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato, Shiru Ladonai, Baruch Hu Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato, Shiru Ladonai, Shiru Shir Chadash, Shiru Ladonai Kol Haaretz, Shiru Ladonai Baruch Hu Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato, Shiru Ladonai Baruch Hu Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato. We'll turn now to page 132, or Zarua, toward the very bottom of the page. Or Zarua la tzadik, ulehishrei lev simcha. Or Zarua la tzadik, ulehishrei lev simcha. Simechu tzadikim b'Adonai, Vehodu lezecher kodsho. Simechu tzadikim lahadonai. Vehodu lezecher kodsho. All right, we're now on page 134. Zamru ladonai bechinor. Bechinor vekol zimram. B'chatzotzrot vekol shofar, ha'ariu lifnei hamelech Adonai, Yiram hayamum lo, tevehel veyoshvevam, neharot yimcha uchaf yachad, harim yiradeinu, lifnei Adonai kiva, Yishbot haaretz, Yishbot tevel betzedek, ve'amim mesharim, Hiram hayamum lo, tevel ve'yoshvevam, neharot yimcha uchaf yachad, harim yiradeinu. We're now on page 135, the last Hebrew paragraph in the middle of the page, Romemu. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu vehishtachavu lehar kodsho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu vehishtachavu lehar kodsho Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu vehishtachavu lehar kodsho. We turn to page 136, the 29th Psalm, beginning at the top of the page. Mizmor leDavid, Avu l'Adonai b'nei Elim, Avu l'Adonai kavod va'oz, Avu l'Adonai kevod shemo, Ishtachavu l'Adonai behadrat kodesh, Kol Adonai al hamayim, el kavod hirim, Adonai al Mahayim Rabim Adonai al Mahayim Rabim Kol Adonai B'Hakoach Kol Adonai Behadar Kol Adonai Shover Harazim Vaishaber Adonai et Arzei Halvanon Vayarkidehem kemo egel, Lebanon veSirion, kemo ben Reimim, kemo ben Reimim. Kol Adonai chotzev lahavotesh, Kol Adonai yachil midbar, Yachil Adonai midbar kadesh, Kol Adonai yecholel layalot, Vayechesof ye'arot, Uvechalo kulo mekavod, Kulo, kulo, kulo mekavod. Kulo mekavod. Adonai lamabul yashav, vayeshev Adonai melech leolam. Adonai oz le'amo yiten, Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom. We'll turn now to L'Chadodi on page 138, and we'll do the first, second, fifth, and ninth paragraphs. And for those that choose for the ninth paragraph, you can either rise and face the door that you most recently walked through, or certainly, go in that direction and bow in its direction. It's more conceptual than it is necessarily about standing, but the idea is to treat the incoming of Shabbat with a reverence and with a appreciation and a gratitude and an excitement, as if you were greeting again. Perhaps God's self, or even something perhaps a little more terrestrial, just a loved one, somebody that you really would look forward to seeing. And that is kind of, again, our image of Shabbat coming into our lives. So we're on page 138. Lecha dodi likrat kala yalanai 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 pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala yalanai 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 pnei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor vezachor bedibur echad. Ishmi'anu el hameyuchad, Adonai echad u'shmo echad, L'shemu tiferet ve'elitila, Lecha dodi likrat kala yalanai yalanai yalanai, B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala yalanai 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 B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha, Ki hi mekor haberacha, Merosh mikedem nesucha, Sof ma'aseh b'machshavat tchila. Lecha dodi likrat kala yalanai 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 B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala yalanai 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 B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Hitoreri, Kiva orech kumi ori, ori, shir daberi, Kevod Adonai alaych nigla, Lecha dodi likrat kala yalanai 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 B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala yalanai 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 B'nei Shabbat nekabela. Boi v'shalom ateret b'alam, Gam v'simcha u'etzolam, Toch emunei am segulam, Boi chala, Lecha dodi likrat kala, Yananai, 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 B'nei Shabbat, Nekabela, Lecha dodi likrat kala, Yananai, 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 B'nei Shabbat, Nekabelam. Okay, please be seated if you're standing. We'll turn to Tzadika Tamar on page 140, just where it indents in the Hebrew. Tzadika Tamar Yifrach Keres Bavanon Iskem Chetulim Bebeit Adonai Bechatzrot Eloheinu Yafrichu Od Yenun Veseva Teshenim Verananim Yehu Lehagim Yashar Adonai Tzuri Velo Ablata Mo. We'll turn now to the Chatzi Kaddish on page 144. Yitkadal v'hitkadash shemei rabam Ve'amad yivrach kirutei v'yamlich malchutei V'chayechon u'vyomechon U'b'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael Ba'agala ba'agala U'bizman kariv eimeru Amen Yehi shmei rabam mevarach Le'alam le'almea yitbarach Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitorma v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal Shemei dekudsha brichu Leila min kol berchata v'shirata Tush bechata v'nechemata Tamihiran b'halma v'yimeru Amen. We turn now to the Baruch Hu on page 146. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Leolam Vahem. We'll turn now to page 149, and let's read together in English toward the very bottom of the page. This is an hour of change. Within it we stand uncertain on the border of light. Shall we draw back or cross over? Where shall our hearts turn? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? This is the hour of change, and within it we stand quietly on the border of light. What lies before us? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? Umavir yom umevi laila, umavdil beyom velaila, Adonai tzavot shemo, El chai v'kayam tamim lochaleinu leolam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, Amari barhavim. We'll turn now to page 150, and we'll read together in English toward the bottom of the page. Everlasting love, you offered your people Israel, by teaching us Torah and mitzvot, laws and precepts. Therefore, Adonai our God, when we lie down and when we rise up, we will meditate on your laws and your commandments. We will rejoice in your Torah forever. Day and night we will reflect on them, for they are life, and doing them lengthens our days. Never remove your love from us. Praise to you, Adonai, who loves your people Israel. Ki ehem chayinu ve'orech yaminu, v'hem negei yom ha'av v'layla. ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Will you join me on page 154? ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, Adonai Elohechem Emet. We'll turn now to page 157 as we read together in English toward the very top of the page. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot. That wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. As we turn to page 158, Mechamocha at the very top of the page. Ya bye bye bim bim bam, ya bye bye bim bam, ya bye bye bim bim bam, ya bye bye bim bam, ya bye 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 bye, ya bye bye bim bam, ya bye 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 bye, ya bye bye bim bam. Mi chamocha bailim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'hakodesh. Nor tehilot o sefele, nor tehilot o sefele, ya bye bye bim 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 bam, ya bye bye bim bam, ya bye bye bim 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 bam, ya bye bye bim bam, ya bye 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 bye, ya bye bye bim bam. Ya bye 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 bye, ya bye bye bim bam. Malchutecha ra'u vanecha, Vokeam lifnei Moshe u'Miriam ze li'anehu ve'amru, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. V'nemar kifad Adonai et Yaakov, Golo miyad chazak mimenu, Baruch ata Adonai, Gal Yisrael. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Adonai, help us to walk with good companions, to live with hope in our hearts and eternity in our thoughts, that we may lie down in peace and rise up waiting to do your will. Ashkibenu is on the top of page 160. Ashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom, ve'hamidenu shomreinu lechayim. Ashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom, ve'hamidenu shomreinu lechayim. Ushmor tzeiteinu Uloheinu lechaim u'shalom me'ata ve'ad olam. Ashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom, mehamidenu shomreinu lechayim. Blessed are you, Adonai, guardian of Israel, whose shelter of peace is spread over us, over all your people Israel, and over Yerushalayim. We turn to Vishamru now on the top of page 162. Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. עין עיני עיני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת, שבת ויהי נפש. I invite us now to begin the Amidah together on page 164. The choice of standing or remaining seated will be yours. As always, we'll continue silently from there. And as we used to do way back in the day, we're going to give, about 4 or 5 minutes or so. So my screen will go dark. It'll say silent Amidah. This is your time to use it as most meaningful to you. As always, we begin together, page 164. Adonai sefatai tiftachu fi yagi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Ose shalom imromav, uyase shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, Yahase Shalom, Yahase Shalom. Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yahase Shalom, Yahase Shalom. Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. So we'll turn now to page 371 to offer our Misha Berach, our healing prayer for this evening. I'll invite everyone to just take a few moments for yourselves, those that are with us on the Zoom, those who may be watching on the stream, just again to pray for your closest loved ones who you may be thinking of this evening, and then, of course, to continue to pray for a world in need of a lot of healing, and, of course, again, still thinking about our friends and family in our community in Australia and holding them in our hearts tonight. So just take a moment or two for yourselves, and then we'll join together in the middle of page 371. Misha Be'erach Avotenu Mekor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misheberach Yimotenu Mekor HaBracha Labotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. Now we offer our prayer for Israel, which can be found in our prayer books on page 377. Avinu Shabashamayim Sur Yisrael v'goalo barech et Medinat Yisrael reshit smichat gulatenu. Hagen alea be'evrat chastecha ufros aleha sukat shlomecha. Ushlach orcha v'amitcha l'rasheha sareha v'yoatzea. V'taknim be'etzah tova milfanecha v'natata shalom ba'aretz v'simchat olam liyoshveha v'nomar Amen. O Heavenly One, Protector and Redeemer of Israel, bless the state of Israel, which marks the dawning of hope for all who seek peace. Shield it beneath the wings of your love, spread over it the canopy of your peace. Send your light and truth to all who lead and advise, guiding them with your good counsel. Establish peace in the land and fullness of joy for all who dwell there. And together we say, Amen. Amen. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It's like I said at the beginning, we did this for so long and it felt like second nature. And now we do it so infrequently that it takes a second to kind of remember both the challenges and some of the opportunities that Zoom provides. One of which is, a little bit more oddly of a somewhat more intimate atmosphere, right? We can all kind of see each other in that way. And those that may be watching us on the stream, maybe a little bit less so. So I wanted to share a little bit more of perhaps a little bit more of an instruction or a sharing of a detail or a piece of our history and practice that maybe some of us aren't so familiar with. And it's a little bit late, unfortunately, because it has to do with Hanukkah, which of course just passed. But, as I like to do, I like to stretch these wonderful, joyous moments out as much as I possibly can. And it's mostly to share with something I didn't know about, which is a festival, a chag, as we would call it in Hebrew, that is, as far as I understand it, a uniquely Sephardic, or more accurately, Sephardic Mizrahi tradition, tied to, as my understanding, the seventh night of Hanukkah. And I'm just curious, the only person on this that I could imagine having any idea would be Dr. Linskowski and maybe Rona, but it's one that you will appreciate as soon as I tell you. So the name of this holiday in Hebrew is Chag Habanot. Chag Habanot, okay? Chag Habanot means the festival, basically, of the women, okay? And which women in particular and why on Hanukkah. This is what we are going to explore a little bit. So the holiday itself is, my understanding, largely began in North Africa, but is celebrated by Jews, what are sometimes referred to as, if you saw it written out, M-E as in Middle East, N-A. NA as in North Africa, so MENA Jews. It is a designation that I think Jews, especially of Sephardic and Mizrahi background, are increasingly, trying to not lose the unique heritage of their ancestry, many of which going back again for Jews of North Africa, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Libya, Egypt, less so Egypt to some degree, but most of them, again, counting their ancestry, their Jewish community back very long time. In the case, in many cases, to the first expulsion of Jews, which is 586 BCE. In some cases, even earlier than that, the destruction of the northern tribes. In some cases, even earlier than that. So you're talking about, in some cases, a tradition that can go back, several thousand years. And of course, is the reason why it's not familiar to most of us is that most of our community are made up of Ashkenazi Jews, not exclusively, but the vast majority are. And so this is not something I ever heard of growing up or that I'm familiar with. And so it piqued my interest. And one of the major sort of foci of it is the story of Judith. Now, you may have grown up knowing a friend named Judith or somebody named Yehudit in Hebrew. It's actually a very common, very popular Hebrew name, and it's a sort of known name in association, but less so in terms of the story itself, and with good reason. So, just out of curiosity, if I'm looking at my friends who are visible, how many of you have ever heard of the Book of Judith? Okay. So, okay, Bonnie has her hand up, so that's because that's one out of our polity here. Maybe if we were watching, and we could see their friends watching at home, they might know more. The reason why we're less familiar with it is really twofold. One is that it is not historically associated with any holiday, and for many Jews, our knowledge of our sacred literature tends to be associated with our knowledge of holiday, right? So we're very familiar with something like Megillat Ruth, okay, the Book of Ruth, because it's read right on we're here, or Esther, or or Echa, because they are read on those particular holidays. But the more relevant reason is because if you opened up a Tanakh, you will not find the Book of Judith anywhere. So it is on the one hand a Jewish story about a Jewish heroine, and I'll tell you the story in short part in a second. But on the other hand, it's nowhere to be found. So I'm going to take a 30-second tangent to explain. This is where the teaching element comes in, and I'm going to use this as again. I was trying to think about what can we can benefit ourselves from being on this cold, snowy night on Zoom. Is we can screen share. Okay, so I'll those that have studied Torah with me will know my really great, great, great appreciated new element of Jewish life is this wonderful website called Sefaria, which will give you access to virtually everything you could possibly want. Can you all see that on the screen? Yeah, okay. So excellent. So normally, right, we're studying Torah, you want to go, okay, the Tanakh is right here. Okay, Tanakh is right here, and you'll have all the things you're normally looking for, the Torah, the Nevi'im, the prophets, the Ketuvim, the writings. Okay, but again, even if you went up and down, you would not find this particular book anywhere. Why? Because it's not technically part of the canon. It is not part of what was eventually determined to be the official books of our sacred literature. Again, Torah, prophets, writings taking us really to the sort of latter period of where it's really possible for there to be such books. But then there are all manner of others that didn't make it in, but sort of float just outside of, that, depending on how the rabbis felt about, may or may not reference from time to time in the Talmud, in the Midrash, and so on. These on Sefaria will generally be collected under something called Second Temple writing, Second Temple literature. Okay, so these are things of which we don't necessarily have the exact prominence of every single item that you will see here, but some of them we have a general sense were either created or were known to be known around the time period of the Second Temple, which again is largely the time period that takes us from the story of the aftermath of Hanukkah, the retaking of Judea from the Greek Syrians, right, and then eventually the establishment of the Hashmonaim dynasty from the family of the Maccabees, which then kind of goes a little bit of afield, and Herod and the building of the Second Temple, and the Sadducees and the Pharisees and all the things, all these things kind of going on in this very, very interesting couple 100-year period. And then a number of these books, which again are sort of broadly grouped together under the title of Apocrypha. As you can tell just from the word itself, it's obviously not a Hebrew word, right? We're borrowing from the Greek. Apocrypha itself in Christianity is very specific. Again, in certain churches is inside the canon, certain churches outside of the canon. Okay, but all of these books, I haven't studied every one of them. Fascinating. Most of them really fascinating. And in the case of Judith, not just fascinating, but compelling. Okay, and compelling enough that in some views, views of the rabbis, views of academics, is to look at it as something of the first version of a historical novel, something that did not necessarily actually happen, but is based in a certain time period and has certain themes. But as the rabbis sort of say, is you can look at these books, you can read them, you may find them interesting. You're not to draw halacha, Jewish law, and you're not to draw Jewish sort of theology from any of these books. But at the same time, the rabbis were largely aware of many of them, including the books of the Maccabees. As I've taught many times before, if you're looking for the books of Maccabees in the Tanakh, you won't find them anywhere. Okay, you have to look to the Apocrypha for it. And you have any number of other books, okay, one of which we would think would be more appropriate in this case, right? Megillat Antiochus. This is a story of the accounts of what happens during the story of Hanukkah, right? In these books of Maccabees. But this book of Judith is the one that's sort of the interesting piece here in the beginnings of why I'm giving this sermon in the first place. And just a couple others that are fascinating. The Book of Jubilees and Ben Sira. Some point or another, I'd love to try to teach these in a class at some point, but conversation for another time. But if you were to open the Book of Judith, the story itself, as you'll sort of see indicated over here, we don't know exactly when it was composed or not, but it tells the story of a remarkable heroine whose name is Judith, who is living in a town basically on the war path from Assyria to the land of Israel. So if we were, tell me if this is still working, if I lose you anywhere, right? If we were going to look at a map of the world and want to know where we're talking about here, right? If the land of Israel being right down here, Assyria was in a time the most powerful empire of Babylon, of Mesopotamia. So it had its power base in what would be modern day Syria, and a few different places depending on the time period, and eventually would be overtaken by the Babylonians, who themselves would be overtaken by the Persians, right? That's sort of the order of them each in sort of successive falling. Now, here's the challenge. Okay, if we go back to the book of Judith, and as you see here in the summary, it describes this all taking place in the 12th year of King Nebuchadnezzar. Except the problem is it refers to Nebuchadnezzar, as we'll see in the first, okay, who lived in Nineveh and was an Assyrian king, not a Babylonian king. Okay, so our first sort of existential challenge of this book is that it's placing us in a time or with a king that couldn't exist in that time period, right? Something about it is factually incorrect. And as it turns out, many of the details of the story are, in fact, historically impossible if we were to read it literally, if we were to assume that all the characters and the events that are taking place and so on. But some of the things, right, the setting itself and the stuff that's going on are very real. And what happens is there basically is a small town kind of on the way, as it were, to Jerusalem. And this is the town in which Judith lives. And Judith basically is living in this town. It becomes besieged. And in her wisdom, not necessarily in her physical strength, but in her wisdom, she sneaks out and she sneaks into the tent of the general of the Assyrian army, whose name is Holofernes, if I remember correctly. And she gives him cheese, dairy, things that are salty to make him want to drink wine. He then drinks said wine, and as you can imagine, falls asleep, and she kills him. And it's very similar to a few other stories we have in our tradition. Deborah and Sisera is another, Yoel and Sisera, as I should say, right? Another sort of example of this. But Judith basically becomes the heroine of the story. She saves not only the town, but she saves, in essence, Jerusalem itself. And the Jews of this community are ultimately saved when they otherwise would have been completely destroyed. Now, this comes back to our story of this unique holiday created by the North African communities to honor women, and in particular to honor Judith. And as I said, in the seventh night of Hanukkah, there has been this tradition, and it still exists to this day, in which women, not just Judith, right, but Jewish heroines throughout time, are acknowledged and are appreciated for their work, holy work to our people historically. people, for example, who are living in those communities may go to the shul, may get a special blessing. It's common for people to give women to give gifts to each other, or for the bridegroom the groom to give a gift to the bridegroom. There are any number of these kinds of things. One tradition that I loved that I came across was that women who had found themselves in disagreement with each other, perhaps in an argument, would take the opportunity during this holiday to reconcile with each other. Right? It's big, big, big holiday, and as it happens on the seventh night of Hanukkah, the eighth day, and is the one holiday, if I'm not mistaken, in which I think Rosh Chodesh always happens in the middle of the or happens on the seventh night. So it's tied to Rosh Chodesh also, which is traditionally understood to be a holiday specifically for women to celebrate. So all of this, was fascinating to me in and of itself. But then I came across a more modern idea. This is from Rabbi Jill Hammer, and she came up with a really beautiful ceremony, which unfortunately, as I said, I'm a few days too late. But I'm hoping that for next Hanukkah, we will all take this tradition on and make this seventh night into a Chag HaBanot, right? In other words, to make it into something, first of all, give it acknowledgement to the Mizrahi and Sephardi community for creating it, right? We don't want to just take it and appropriate it, give it its due credit. But then to bring this into our communities as well, to bring it into the temple, to bring it to our homes. And I want to share with you, I'll put it up on the screen, but she came up with sort of 7 things you can do while lighting each of those candles, which adds to me, I think, increasing layers of significance, right? So that you light the first candle in honor of Judith and all the Jewish women heroes throughout history. You light a second candle in honor of women heroes that you personally admire. And she says here, right, she emphasizes it in the earlier explanation, right, to really name the names, to say it out loud. Don't speak in generalities. Talk about who it is that you admire and why, right? Light the third candle in honor of women teachers and spiritual leaders whom you know. Again, name names, including relatives and friends. Light the fourth candle in honor of Jewish mothers and grandmothers, including your own. Light the fifth candle in honor of all Jewish girls. Light the sixth candle in honor of your family. This candle can be special for daughters, or you can have the candle represent the whole family, men and women, boys and girls. And then lastly, to light the seventh candle in honor of the Shekhinah, the indwelling presence of God that is in every person, but in Jewish mystical tradition, the Shekhinah is depicted in particular in female form. So I thought, really, again, these are sort of beautiful ideas of taking something that, by the seventh night, there is a certain, I'm going to be very delicate about choice of words here, a certain inertia that develops, right? Maybe even bordering on a certain monotony. Once you've done the same ritual, we've added a new candle, but you can start to lose a certain momentum. And one of the great things I find about a holiday like Hanukkah that has actually very limited halacha, but a tremendous amount of minhag, of custom, that we can continue to make meaning out of these holidays, and in particular to draw our attention to stories that we otherwise might not tell. And Judith is a classic example of this. While on the one hand, she isn't included in the canon, it has nothing to do, right? She is actually an incredibly powerful and laudable character in our tradition. The rabbis refer to her in many instances, and only is really left out because of sort of more complicated historical, political, even theological reasons, right? But we lose in that a certain attachment to a character that otherwise should be a known personality in our tradition, along with the Moses and Aaron's and David's and so on. And that again, our tradition is one that tells us, our mightiest heroes and heroines are not necessarily the big, strong, Ajax carrying a hammer type. They're oftentimes the ones that are trying to work within a situation that is already desperate and finding a way, sometimes miraculously, to overcome what seem to be impossible odds, right? And to not just to survive, but ultimately to thrive as a result of it. So to me, I think, especially in a world that seemed to be going in the direction of really celebrating, I think, the strong leadership of women in our communities, there is a tide of regression that is also evident in certain parts of our communities and our world. I think Chag HaBanot ought to, all the more so, right, find its place where it belongs in the average, significant calendar of the Jewish people, whether you are Sephardic or Ashkenazi or otherwise. And I can only speak for myself, but I certainly plan next year to bring this tradition to our home here and certainly to our temple. And I hope that you will consider doing the same. And if you're interested in learning more about Judith or the Apocrypha, as I said, Safari is a great place to begin. Just just know it can get a little wacky. That's all I will say for now. But it can get a little wacky the further you go into it. So maybe bring a guide if you can. So with that, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom, and we will talk about. Oh, very nice, Kathy. Right, talking about Kislev being the hidden light. That's very nice. Our Rosh Chodesh group again, always one step ahead of me. Nothing should make a rabbi happier than to hear that. That is for sure. So we'll turn back to our prayer books now to page 586. And page 586 at the bottom of the page, Aleinu L'Shabeach. Aleinu L'Shabeach Ladon HaKol Latet Gedula Liotzer Breshit Shelo Asanu Kegoye Aratzot Velo Samahanu Kemishpechot Adama Shelo Sam Chelkenu Kahem Vegor Aleinu Kechol Hamonam Vanachnu Korim Mishtachavim Umodim Lifnei Melech Malchei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, page 591. V'nehemar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad. Ask those in mourning and those observing yard sites to remain standing in whatever way feels most appropriate to you. The rest of us may be seated. We think first of those who passed in our community in recent months. Hillary Butler, Michael Fagenbaum, Danny Horowitz, David Carlin, Morris Kramer, Leonard Lauder, Jeanette Meyerowitz, Carol Nadell, Perry Ranan, Gloria Sapiro, Edward Schiff, Louise Silverman, and Sue Wartor. We also marked the yard sites that occurred during the last week for Frank Britz, Miriam de Rothschild, Thomas Nash Glynn, Howard Graham, Beatrice Gruber, Philip Heller, Sylvia Honig, Mark Joseph, Ruth Genser Kahn, Arthur Kaplan, Rose Koplovich, Bertha Karp, Rain Kelman, Vera Lee, Raymond Levin, Emily Levy, Bob Matlick, Barry Metzger, Stephen Osofsky, Emmanuel Sachs, Marvin Schreier, Harold Sender, Amy Elizabeth Shapiro, Meyer Jacob Simon, Mark Solomon, Philip Spiegel, Andrew Strasser, and Nat Zimmerman. In addition to those names that I just shared, if anyone is saying Kaddish for anyone we didn't mention, you can say their names aloud, put them in the chat. Of course, we invite our friends who may be watching on the stream to add the names of your loved ones as well. I'll invite the mourners to join with me on page 598. Again, page 598. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah. Be'alma dibra chirute v'yamlich malchute b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'chaye dechol beit Yisrael b'agala u'b'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shemei rabba mebarach la'alam u'lialmei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei dekudsha b'richu. Leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata ta'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shalama rabba min shemaya b'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Zichronam livracha, may every one of their memories be for a blessing. Okay, well, Shabbat Shalom to everyone. Before we end our service with Kiddush, let me get Shelly sent the announcements somewhere around here. There we go. So first, if you didn't get the announcement, and I hope this is pretty self-evident at this point, services tomorrow morning will be virtual as well, and followed by Torah study, which will be virtual as well. Services begin at 10 o'clock. Virtual Torah study begins at 12 o'clock. And as always, you can stream the service, and you can join us on Zoom for our Torah study. Also, as last I've heard, and if there is any change, we'll certainly let you know. But Sunday, December 28th, are coming up in 2 days, is our next Maureen's Haven homeless shelter at the Bridgehampton Child Care Center. I have to assume, again, it's going forward even with the snow. So there still are some spots available to bring food. If you're able to, please sign up in the email newsletter that went out on Friday, that being today at noon. Also, have to check in about this, but we are 20s and 30s group Dor Chadash and scheduled to go bowling at 6 o'clock on Sunday evening. Again, we'll have to see kind of how the roads are and things like that, but please contact Shelly. You can put you in touch with Adam and Hank about joining them again on Sunday. We hope that it will go forward. On Monday, should be a regular day. Niddah Mitzvah will be on Zoom. My Zionism class at 10 a.m. on Zoom as well. Current events group should be meeting on Wednesday, December 31st at noon this week, led by Jeff Liu. And a reminder that our temple office will be closed on Thursday, January 1st for the New Year's Day. So those are all of my announcements for now. Anybody online? Anything I missed? Important? Okay. Very good. All right. So let's end with Shalom Aleichem, and then we'll do Kiddush. Shalom Aleichem is on page 627. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Asharet, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malchei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boachem Leshalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malchei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruchuni Leshalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malchei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzedchem Leshalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malchei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, we'll turn to Kiddush on page 123. If you have your Kiddush cup handy, join me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam b'horei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho b'ahava uvratzon inchilanu zikaron l'maaseh v'reishit yu yom techila l'mikra'ei kodesh zecher letziat mitzrayim kivahanu v'acharta Ve'otanu kidashta mikol hamim Ve'shabbat kodshecha Ve'ahava uratzon inchaltanu Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat Amen. Okay. Chaim, Shabbat Shalom. So I'm going to turn off the streaming, so we'll say goodbye to our streaming friends, and we can leave the Zoom open for a couple minutes. And again, services tomorrow, virtual only, 10 o'clock. Same link that you should have gotten sent by